Today we are going to discuss dysentery and its effects throughout human history. Imagine that you are a concerned parent watching over your sick child. You wait with apprehension to see if your child will be among the 30% that will fail to survive their first year. Or you could simply be a normal person going about your life who suddenly falls ill, and as you realize from having watched other people suffer the same fate, your bowels will continue to leak fluids until you die. Even royalty were not immune to the ravages of this undignified disease. Dysentery, also commonly known as diarrhea, is often a source of humor for children in the Western world today. But since the development of agriculture, it has been a very deadly condition for much of the human race. Parts of the world today with poor sanitation still see a lot of fatalities due to this preventable illness. Many well-known historical figures have also met their untimely demise because of it. Technically, dysentery is an inflammatory disease of the intestine, most specifically the colon. Diarrhea and abdominal pains are always present as symptoms. Sometimes fever is present as well. Usually it is caused by some type of pathogen, such as bacteria, viruses, or parasites. Most cases of dysentery in the modern world are due to bacteria which multiply under favorable conditions. These favorable conditions are often the result of poor sanitation practices. In instances where dysentery is so severe that it is life-threatening, victims will often pass a liter of water or more per hour. With modern assistance, a patient can be given fluids to treat dehydration until the disease has run its course. When modern medicine is not available, however, the end result is very uncomfortable and very deadly. The most common cause of this disease throughout history is thought to be a bacteria of the genus Shigella. Although data is insufficient to provide exact counts, estimates suggest that dysentery caused by this bacteria killed 34,000 children under the age of 5 in 2013. In that same year, 40,000 people over the age of 5 also died as a result of the disease. The amount of death in modern times can seem insignificant compared to the distant past. For instance, in medieval times and in antiquity as well, almost 1/3 of all children died of dysentery before reaching 1 year of age. The poor sanitation that resulted from warfare could also encourage conditions for this horrible ailment to thrive. In the U.S. Civil War, dysentery caused about 45,000 deaths in the Union Army and around 50,000 in the Confederate Army. The non-existent sanitation practices often contaminated drinking water, which then infected anyone who consumed it. Archaeologists and medical researchers have both tried to understand how it affected settlements in the past, and, more importantly, how the disease spread. Unfortunately, the data can sometimes provide little clarity. Quite often, dysentery in the past occurred in outbreaks that would come and go without a clear cause. Helene Kastenbrandt is one historian who has focused on this issue. She has proposed that dysentery is epidemic in nature and has complex links that go beyond just simple sanitation. She published her doctoral thesis, which suggested this theory while attending the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. She focused on Sweden in the 1700s and 1800s, as 90% of all deaths in the country were due to dysentery when outbreaks were happening. Kastenbrandt noted that the disease had detrimental effects, but the geographical differences were significant. For example, 90% of all deaths in a parish could be due to dysentery in some years, while nearby parishes were left practically unaffected. She focused on how the disease affected Sweden from 1750 to 1900, and specifically tried to determine how local and regional differences over time might have affected the outbreaks. The result, as she expressed, was that her study points to dysentery as very epidemic in nature. The disease struck communities extremely hard at times. It flared up quite irregularly, and the patterns of transmission differed from one outbreak to the next. The rather unsatisfying conclusion of her research efforts is that no single cause can be given for why dysentery outbreaks occurred or do occur. Genomic researchers recently sequenced DNA of the Shigella dysenteriae bacterium that is known to cause the disease to see if they could determine how it originated and how it spreads. Historians previously thought that European travelers brought the microorganism back home after visiting South America, Asia, or Africa. The latest findings from genomic analysis, which were published in Nature Microbiology, came to a much different conclusion. More than 300 samples were collected from all over the planet, with efforts to find samples starting in the early 20th century. The latest specimens were found in 2011. Laboratory analysis indicated that the Shigella bacteria in all of the samples have their origins in 18th century Europe. Rather than Europeans bringing this disease home, it would appear that they were the ones spreading it all over the world. Also disturbing is the fact that at least 1% of the bacteria have developed antibiotic resistance. Thus, even in modern times, certain strains of this bacteria can still kill people. According to study co-author Francois-Xavier Weil, this bacterium is still in circulation and could be responsible for future epidemics if conditions should prove favorable, such as a large gathering of people without access to drinking water or treatment of human waste. This study highlights the need for an effective vaccine, which will be crucial for controlling this disease in the future in view of the reduced efficacy of antibiotics. The fate of those living in the Pacific Islands during the 18th century serves as an example of what could happen in the future if the worst-case scenario were to become reality. The Pacific Islands were the last isolated population to be exposed to European diseases, and dysentery was the one that ravaged the islands the most. The wave of dysentery that washed over the Pacific Islands usually arrived via transmission from other natives a few months or years before Europeans arrived in large numbers. So most of the accounts concerning how the disease affected the islanders is provided by Europeans who saw the aftermath. One instance is documented from 1803 to 1804, when a dysentery outbreak on the Hawaiian island of Oahu killed around 5,000 people. James Jarvis, an American who wrote of the event well after the fact, stated that it occasioned a great mortality, so much so that the natives state the living were not able to bury the dead. He additionally described the symptoms of dysentery as a process during which thin discharges like sour starch water flowed frequently from the bowels. The reconstruction of reports from the Pacific exploration era indicate that anywhere from 1/5 to 1/3 of the population succumbed to the disease. Although the microorganism responsible for the infection is known, researchers still could not determine why this particular population had a high mortality rate. A common theory about the spread of diseases from Europe to other populations in the Pacific and the Americas is that native populations did not have the necessary immunities to survive European pathogens. However, studies of a very isolated Amazon River Amerindian group that were isolated from other human groups for over 10,000 years had a surprising result, which brings the immunity theory into question. These Amazonian people had never used antibiotics, yet had the most complex microbiome ever reported in humans. Natural variability and effects of the environment may play a more critical role than researchers previously considered. Although the spread and effects of dysentery are still in question, what is certain is that this affliction has killed many throughout history. Let us look at some notable historical figures who have died from it. Edward I of England, also known as Edward Longshanks, lived from June 1239 to July 1307. Edward was in the middle of a military conflict with the Scots when he caught dysentery. His condition deteriorated rapidly. When servants arrived on his final day and lifted him up to try and feed him, he died in their arms. Erasmus was a Dutch philosopher and Christian humanist who is considered to be one of the greatest Renaissance scholars. He was born in October 1466 and died in July 1536. He was already old and losing his strength in 1536, but dysentery came on suddenly, and he died very quickly. Reportedly, his last words were, "Dear God." Sir Francis Drake was an English sea captain and explorer during the Elizabethan era. He was, regrettably, also a slave owner and a pirate. Drake was born in 1540 and died in 1596. Drake died off the coast of Panama after participating in an attack to capture the largest port of the country, which failed. He came down with dysentery after the attack and never recovered. Drake was buried at sea in a lead-lined coffin. Divers continue to search for his final resting place, but it has never been found. Nathaniel Bacon was a colonist in Virginia who is most well remembered for being the instigator of Bacon's Rebellion. He was born in 1647 and died in October 1676. Bacon had a disagreement with the governor of Virginia concerning taxes. Bacon also wanted to exterminate the natives and was frustrated that the English government did not agree. The result was that Bacon and his forces burned Jamestown to the ground. Before English naval reinforcements could arrive, Bacon passed away from dysentery. Thus, the entire movement he created came to a sudden end. The last unfortunate victim we will explore is Michel Vieuxtemps. He was born in 1904 and died in 1930. Michel was a French adventurer most well known for his travels in Africa. He was the first European to visit the ruins of Samarra, an ancient walled city located deep in the Sahara Desert. In September of 1930, Michel set out to explore areas of North Africa that were mostly unknown to Europeans. He did not speak any of the local languages, but managed to complete his goal and returned to civilization in November. A few days after completing his journey, Michel was so weakened from dysentery that he died. For a great deal of human history, dysentery was not a major concern. It could certainly appear due to parasites or other illnesses, but small populations that lived hunter-gatherer lifestyles usually did not have to worry about large epidemics. As with many other things that are unpleasant about history, the discovery of agriculture helped promote the spread of fatal diseases. European societies in particular managed to live in crowded, unsanitary conditions, which in turn allowed bacteria that caused dysentery to thrive. As it traveled the world, it found new populations to infect and to destroy. By the 19th century, there was no place left on Earth where humans were not at risk of dying from dysentery. As our exploration into individuals throughout history has shown, even in the 20th century, people continued to die from this affliction. Relatively recently, between 1969 and 1972, a dysentery outbreak in Central America killed 20,000 people. Thanks to the development of antibiotic resistance, these types of outbreaks might become more frequent and more difficult to control in the future. Furthermore, the fact remains that researchers do not have a complete understanding of how dysentery is able to suddenly appear and disappear in communities. Dysentery is an ancient calamity that could very easily become a plague upon modern humans. Can modern technology create new strategies to cure and control this deadly affliction? Or is dysentery an unfortunate and inevitable consequence of human experience? Please let us know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching Bad Things in History.